I want you to think about something for a moment. Since the first week of March 2026, this country has been hit by a major severe weather event. A tornado outbreak, a destructive squall line, a hail siege, a flood disaster, at least once every single week. Sometimes twice. Sometimes the events have overlapped so completely that it's impossible to tell where one ends and the next one begins. The 2026 tornado season is off to a fast, violent, and heartbreaking start. In March alone, 3 major outbreaks drove an extremely above-average tornado count. The April 17th through 18 outbreak produced 80 confirmed tornadoes. The April 22nd through 24 outbreak included the Enid EF4. Overall, across this multi-day sequence, 8 fatalities and 29 injuries were confirmed across multiple states. 8 fatalities, 29 injuries across a season that is still in April. And yesterday, Monday, April 27th, was supposed to be the peak, the 62, 1% probability day, the screaming classic tornado outbreak, the day that 55 million Americans were in the threat zone, the day I spent all week warning you about. It happened. The outbreak verified. St. Louis, Missouri was hit. Arkansas was hit. Tennessee was hit. The squall line raced east overnight exactly as the forecast predicted. And the atmosphere, I want you to hear this clearly, is not done. Because today, Tuesday, April 28th, the WPC and the SPC are already looking at what comes next. And what comes next is not a brief break between events. It is another system. And behind that system, another one. And behind that one, potentially another one. A train of storm systems arriving one after another, targeting the same corridor of the country over and over again throughout the first week of May. A massive storm train is coming. And today I'm going to tell you exactly what that means. Before I get into the specifics of what's coming, I need to explain what a storm train is, because it's not just a dramatic phrase. It describes a specific and documented atmospheric pattern that has genuinely concerning implications for communities that are already beaten down from weeks of repeated severe weather. Imagine a conveyor belt, a long wave trough, a persistent dip in the jet stream parked over the western United States. And because of where that trough is located and how it's oriented, it keeps ejecting energy lobes eastward in sequence. Short wave after short wave after short wave. Each one triggering a new storm system as it emerges from the Rockies and crosses the plains. Each new system follows roughly the same track as the one before it. Each one taps the same Gulf moisture plume. Each one finds roughly the same atmospheric environment sitting ahead of it. And each one unloads on roughly the same corridor of the country. That is a storm train, not one event, not 2 events. A series of events connected by the same large-scale pattern, arriving in succession like freight cars on a track that runs directly through your community. The USDA Agricultural Weather Highlights from Friday, April 24th confirm this pattern explicitly, writing that the trailing storm system will also become a powerful storm, leading to a multi-day severe weather outbreak across the plains, Midwest, and Mid-South. Additionally, 5-day rainfall totals of 1 to 2 inches or more should occur from the eastern plains to the central and southern Appalachians. The trailing system. That language is key. Before Monday's outbreak even finished, government meteorologists were already writing about what comes behind it. The trailing system that becomes the next powerful storm, the next car on the train. The WPC extended forecast discussion issued Saturday, April 25th, before Monday's event even began, is already describing the week ahead. A wave of low pressure developing near the tail end of the cold front, with southern stream energy ejection, will become the greater focus for another round of heavy rain and possible severe weather on Tuesday, from the Arklatex to the Tennessee Valley. Significant moisture and instability pooling along the boundary and frontal wave will likely lead to clusters of strong thunderstorms with high rainfall rates, supporting the potential for isolated instances of flash flooding. Read that again. Before Monday's event started, the WPC was already describing Tuesday's threat. The train was already loaded. The cars were already on the tracks. Monday was car number 1. Tuesday is car number 2. And there are more cars behind it. Let me tell you what we know about Monday, because the damage assessments are coming in and the picture is becoming clear. The ensemble guidance leading into Monday showed an exceptionally large severe weather footprint, with a 70% thunderstorm probability across a wide swath of the Central Plains and Mid-South, with many ensemble members in strong agreement on the severity of the setup. The SIG hatching appearing on both the wind and tornado outlook maps indicated forecasters expected not just severe weather, but significantly severe weather. EF2 or stronger tornadoes and 65+ knot wind gusts considered likely within the hatched zone. That forecast verified. The SIG hatching verified. The outbreak that was predicted with a 62, 1% probability signal from 4 days out, a signal that forecasters called exceptionally rare and serious, happened exactly as advertised. In Missouri, a tornado passed through Belton, causing widespread damage across the city. Police Chief Scott Lyons said during a news conference that several minor injuries were reported, but preparations the city made before the storm hit helped prepare people. Widespread damaging wind gusts and flooding rainfall continued to threaten areas already battered by a multi-day onslaught of twisters, massive hail, and historic flooding. Belton, Missouri, a city that was prepared, a city that had people sheltered, a city that absorbed the hit and, because of preparation, minimized casualties. That is exactly what I have been asking people to do all week. And Belton showed that it works. The 2026 tornado season total now stands at a pace running nearly 100 tornadoes above the long-term average through late April, driven by 3 major March outbreaks, the April 17th through 1880 tornado outbreak, and the April 20 through 28 multi-day sequence, including the Enid EF4 and Monday's Mississippi Valley outbreak. 100 tornadoes above average pace in April, before peak tornado season has even arrived. And here is the statistic that I find most sobering about the entire 2026 season so far. The Enid EF4, 175 megawatt winds, 40 homes destroyed, a tornado emergency issued, residents trapped under debris, produced 0 fatalities. Because people were warned and they sheltered. And then the very next week, the Runaway Bay, Texas EF2, a substantially weaker tornado, produced 1 fatality. Because the specific circumstances of that event caught someone in a situation where the warning didn't reach them in time, or where shelter wasn't accessible. The difference between 0 deaths and 1 death is not the strength of the tornado. It is whether the person in its path had a warning and a shelter. That is it. That is the entire variable. I keep coming back to this because the storm train I'm about to describe is going to continue producing tornado and severe weather threats over the next week. And the human cost of that train is almost entirely determined by whether people are prepared before it arrives. Let me get you current on what is happening right now, because Tuesday, today, is not a day off. The WPC confirmed a wave of low pressure developing near the tail end of Monday's cold front, with southern stream energy ejection becoming the greater focus for another round of heavy rain and possible severe weather on Tuesday from the Arklatex to the Tennessee Valley. Significant moisture and instability pooling along the boundary and frontal wave will likely lead to clusters of strong thunderstorms with high rainfall rates, supporting the potential for isolated instances of flash flooding. A marginal risk ERO remains in place for Day 4 Tuesday as a result, the Arklatex to the Tennessee Valley. Today, that corridor, Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, East Texas, Western Tennessee, is still under threat right now as I make this video. The frontal boundary that drove Monday's outbreak has stalled, and a new wave of low pressure is developing along that stalled boundary. And when low pressure develops along a stalled frontal boundary loaded with Gulf moisture, clusters of thunderstorms fire along it, train over the same areas repeatedly, and produce the kind of rainfall that triggers flash flooding. The threat could continue into Tuesday across the southern plains and southeast, with uncertainty still remaining on where the storms will set up. With multiple days of rain over the same areas, flash flooding will be possible. Multiple days of rain over the same areas, that is the flash flooding setup in plain language. The ground that was already saturated by Monday's storms is now being asked to absorb another round of heavy rain from Tuesday's system. The rivers and streams that were already running, elevated from a week of repeated storms, are going to rise further. The low-lying areas, the underpasses, the creek-adjacent neighborhoods, they are at risk today, and some of them have now been at risk continuously for 3 or 4 days without a meaningful dry period in between. I want to say something specific about flash flooding that I think gets lost when the severe weather coverage focuses primarily on tornadoes. Flash flooding is the single deadliest weather hazard in the United States on an annual basis. More people die in flash floods every year than in tornadoes. And the typical flash flood death has one thing in common across almost every case. The person who died drove into a water-covered road. Turn around. Don't drown. That phrase exists because it describes the exact mechanism of most flash flood fatalities. Not people surprised in their homes, not people caught outside in the open, people who drove their vehicle into rising water. Today, in the Arklatex and Tennessee Valley, if you see water over a roadway, do not drive through it. You cannot see the depth. You cannot see whether the road beneath it is intact. 6 inches of fast-moving water can knock you down. 2 feet of water can float your car. That car becomes a debris-filled weapon in the current and a coffin if you cannot get out. Now let me walk you through the rest of the week because the WPC has given us an unusually clear-eyed picture of what is coming in sequence, and I want you to understand the full scope of it. The WPC extended forecast discussion from Saturday, April 25th, valid through Saturday, May the 2nd, describes the full pattern: heavy rain and runoff, and severe weather threats from the Arklatex to the Tennessee Valley. Tuesday may be followed by additional heavy rainfall and runoff potential across the south-central U.S., and also with a New England coastal low to monitor for Thursday and Friday. Guidance clustering and predictability seems above average with the mid-larger scale pattern evolution, and overall main system timings and threats focus through much of the upcoming medium-range timescales. Above average predictability. That means the WPC is more confident than usual in this pattern evolution. They're not hedging. They're saying, here is what is coming, and the models agree with unusual clarity. Let me break it down day by day. Tuesday, April 28th, today, Arklatex to Tennessee Valley. Stalling frontal boundary. Possible severe weather, definite flash flooding risk from training thunderstorms. Communities in Arkansas, East Texas, Western Tennessee, and the Mississippi Delta need to be watching this through the afternoon and tonight. Wednesday, April 29th. The cold front that drove Monday's outbreak continues sagging south and east across the Atlantic seaboard and into the Gulf Coast vicinity. The SPC Day 4-8 discussion from Saturday describes the cold front gradually advancing across the Atlantic seaboard and into the Gulf Coast vicinity before stalling later this work week into next weekend. The front stall is coincident with the southwestward suppression of subtropical ridging, initially centered over southern Mexico. A stalling front over the Gulf Coast in late April, with subtropical moisture being pumped northward. That is the definition of a persistent severe weather and flooding setup for the deep south and southeast. Thursday, April 30th and Friday, May 1st. Near the southern periphery of the westerlies and the northern periphery of the subtropical ridging, there appears a similar signal in both ESIN's and GEF's related medium-range guidance concerning potential for organized severe thunderstorm development by late Tuesday afternoon into Tuesday evening. That specific language, agreement between ECINS, the European ensemble, and GEFS, the American ensemble, is exactly the kind of model consensus signal that gives forecasters confidence in a multi-day outlook. Both major modeling systems are seeing the same thing. The signal is not a fluke. It is a real pattern showing real severe weather development for the end of the work week. The weekend of May the 2nd through 3rd. The NWS 6 to 10-day outlook for April 29th through May 3rd calls for the likelihood of near or below normal temperatures and near or above normal precipitation across much of the country. Above normal precipitation for May the 2nd through 3rd. Combined with the stalling frontal system over the Gulf Coast and the moisture being suppressed northward from the subtropical ridge, the weekend is not a clean break. It is another potentially active period. This is the storm train. Tuesday, Wednesday through Thursday, Friday, the weekend, car after car after car, rolling through the south and the central U.S., targeting the same Gulf moisture, tracking along the same frontal boundary, unloading on the same communities that have been hit repeatedly since the beginning of March. I need to step back from the tornado and wind coverage for a moment, because there is a catastrophe building in the background of this storm train that is not getting nearly the attention it deserves. And it is a catastrophe that gets worse with every additional inch of rain that falls in the coming week. The WPC's excessive rainfall discussion confirms heavy rain that can lead to flash flooding will be a concern, especially as clusters of thunderstorms with high rainfall rates merge and repeatedly train over the same areas. Flash flooding will be possible with multiple days of rain over the same areas. Let me put numbers to what multiple days of rain over the same areas means in the specific context of where we are right now. The Wolf River in Wisconsin was nearly a foot above its record flood stage after last week's outbreak. The Wolf River in Wisconsin was nearly a foot above its record flood stage, putting many streets in the village of Shiocton under as much as a foot of water. Shiocton officials said a majority of the streets in the village limits are impassable and urged people to stay out after ordering evacuations. In Rock County, Wisconsin, a train conductor had to be rescued after flooding caused a train derailment, with train cars carrying grain and corn going off the tracks. A train derailment from flooding. A village where the majority of streets were impassable, a river nearly a foot above its record flood stage, and that was from last week's rain. The storms also threatened to produce flash flooding, including in already soaked Chicago and Milwaukee, where there have been dozens of water rescues in recent days. Dozens of water rescues in Chicago and Milwaukee already, before this week's rain arrives. And now with Tuesday's system adding another round to the Arklatex and Tennessee Valley, with Thursday, Friday's system targeting the deep south, and with a stalling frontal boundary potentially training storms over the same areas through the weekend. The soil moisture deficit that was supposed to protect against flash flooding has been completely erased in large portions of the central U.S. There is nowhere for the water to go. The ground is full, the rivers are elevated, the creeks and streams are running high. Every additional inch of rain from this point forward goes directly to surface runoff, directly into neighborhoods, directly onto roads, directly into basements. The communities in the Mississippi and Ohio River corridors, Memphis, Paducah, Cairo, Evansville, Louisville, need to be watching river stage forecasts this week with the same urgency they've been watching tornado watches. Because a river crest that puts downtown Memphis at risk is not a one-day event that you can survive by spending one night in a shelter. It is a days to weeks-long event that can displace families, destroy property, and poison water supplies. There's a third dimension to this storm train that almost nobody is covering, and it matters deeply to tens of millions of Americans, even if they never see a tornado warning. The USDA agricultural weather highlights confirm that critically dry conditions on the central and southern high plains are leading to an elevated wildfire threat, along with significant stress on rangeland pastures and winter wheat. Significant stress on winter wheat. This is the crop that becomes the flour in your bread, the crop that feeds livestock that become your meat. And it is under significant stress right now on the central and southern high plains, not from too much rain, but from too little. Because the dry line that keeps producing severe weather outbreaks on its eastern side is simultaneously maintaining critically dry conditions on its western side. The same storm train that is producing tornadoes and floods in Arkansas and Tennessee and Missouri is leaving the Texas Panhandle, western Oklahoma, and western Kansas bone dry, windswept, and vulnerable to grass fires. Both things are happening simultaneously. Both things are catastrophic in their own way, and both things are being driven by the same large-scale pattern, the trough that keeps ejecting energy eastward, pulling Gulf moisture northward on one side of the dry line while desert air dominates the other. Additionally, 5-day rainfall totals of 1 to 2 inches or more should occur from the eastern plains to the central and southern Appalachians, leading to the possibility of renewed flooding in the Great Lakes states and drought relief in the south. Drought relief in the south. That is the silver lining in the WPC's language. The storm train, while dangerous and destructive in so many ways, is delivering rainfall to drought-parched communities across portions of the southern plains and mid-south that desperately need it. The rainfall total accumulating over Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee over the next week represents genuine, meaningful drought relief for a region that was in its driest stretch since 1895, just weeks ago. Every inch of rain that soaks into the soil rather than running off is a deposit into the moisture account that those communities have been overdrawn on all spring. This does not make the flooding risk acceptable. It does not make the tornado threat smaller. But it is worth acknowledging that the atmosphere, in its violence and its excess, is simultaneously solving one problem while creating others. That is the complexity of meteorology that simple, severe weather is bad coverage misses. I want to talk about something that rarely gets addressed in weather coverage, because I think it is genuinely important, and I think it is affecting real people's safety decisions right now. The communities that are in the path of this storm train, Arkansas, Tennessee, Missouri, Illinois, Mississippi, Alabama, have been living with elevated weather threat for most of April. Some of these communities have been hit directly, multiple times. Their infrastructure is stressed, their emergency managers are tired, their residents are exhausted, and as I described in a previous video, alarm fatigue, the psychological phenomenon where repeated warnings produce diminished responses, is real and it is peaking right now. The 2026 spring season has already produced multiple major outbreaks, 8 fatalities, and dozens of injuries, and the pattern is not breaking down. Even in a near-normal season, one major outbreak can define the year for a community. One major outbreak can define the year for a community. That sentence sits with me because it captures exactly why alarm fatigue is so dangerous. A community that has been hit 3 times and survived each time intact may start to feel, subconsciously, without even articulating it, that the warning system is crying wolf, that the storm was supposed to be a catastrophic and wasn't, that maybe the next one won't be either. But here's the thing about probability. Each severe weather event is independent. The fact that your community survived Monday's outbreak without casualties does not make Tuesday's or Thursday's threat any smaller. The atmosphere does not reward communities for surviving previous events. It does not give you a free pass because you've already been hit. Every event is its own roll of the dice, and the dice are loaded for a dangerous outcome when the ingredients are aligned. The people who are most at risk right now are not the people who have never heard of severe weather preparedness. They are the people who have been through it 4 times this spring, survived all 4, and are beginning to feel like they've figured out how to handle it. They are the people who are going to skip the shelter this time, because last time they sheltered and nothing happened. They are the people who are going to wait for the siren instead of moving when the warning drops. I am asking you not to be that person. Not this week, not for any event in the storm train. The storm train does not know you've survived everything so far. It just keeps running. Let me be specific about who needs to be on alert for what over the next several days. Today, Tuesday, April 28th, Arklatex and Tennessee Valley. If you live in Northeast Texas, Southwest Arkansas, Northwest Louisiana, or Western Tennessee, you are in today's flash flooding zone. The severe weather risk is secondary to the flooding today. Watch the weather radar through this afternoon and tonight. If heavy rain is training over your area, same storms tracking, over the same spot repeatedly, get out of low-lying areas before the water rises, not after. Wednesday, April 29th through Thursday, April 30th. Deep south and southeast. As the cold front sags south and the stalling boundary sets up over the Gulf Coast vicinity, the threat corridor shifts southward into Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and eventually Georgia. The flooding threat persists, and the severe weather risk, including the potential for organized severe thunderstorm development flagged by both ECENS and GFs, arrives for the end of the week. Friday, May 1st through the weekend, south central U.S. and potentially the East Coast. The WPC is monitoring a New England coastal low for Thursday and Friday, which could bring a separate round of significant weather to the northeast, while the southern system continues producing heavy rain across the south central U.S. Additional heavy rainfall and runoff potential continues across the south central U.S. through the weekend. This means that by the end of this week, severe weather and flooding threats will have touched virtually every region of the lower 48 in some form, from the southern plains to the mid-south, to the deep south, to the Gulf Coast, to the Tennessee Valley, to the Ohio Valley, to the northeast. The storm train doesn't hit just one place. It moves through this country like a conveyor, touching corridor after corridor as the pattern evolves. For farmers specifically, the 5-day rainfall totals of 1 to 2 inches or more from the eastern plains to the central and southern Appalachians represent both drought relief for some areas and renewed flooding risk for others. The critically dry conditions on the central and southern high plains will persist despite the active pattern to the east, maintaining significant stress on winter wheat, rangeland, and pastures. If you are farming winter wheat in western Kansas or the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles right now, your situation is not improving this week. The rain that might help you is falling 200 miles to your east. The wind and heat and dryness that are stressing your crop are continuing. Plan accordingly. Before I close, I need to tell you something about where all of this is heading over the next several weeks. Because understanding the trajectory of the season is the context that makes all of these individual events make sense. WeatherTrack US's 2026 spring severe weather forecast, issued before the season began, called for a front-loaded season with more opportunities for severe weather in March and early April, followed by a tendency toward quieter conditions in many areas by May. Their forecast leaned on analog years that suggested May has the best chance to run above average for tornado and severe storm activity from the southern and eastern plains into the Midwest and Mid-South, before the focus shifts toward more typical plains targets later in spring. That means the storm train, which has been targeting Missouri, Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, Tennessee, and the upper Midwest throughout April, may shift southward and westward as May progresses, returning to the more traditional Tornado Alley corridor of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. Communities in the upper Midwest that have been repeatedly hit in April may get a relative reprieve, while the southern plains steps back into the primary threat zone. But relative reprieve is not the same as no threat. Even in a near-normal season, one major outbreak can define the year for a community. The 2026 season has already proven that it only takes one nocturnal wedge in Oklahoma or a rare early March tornado in Michigan to turn a near-normal season into a life-changing disaster for the people in its path. In the broader context, the collapsing La Niña, the building El Niño, the INSO transition that historically produces some of the most volatile and unpredictable severe weather seasons, means that the seasonal forecast calling for relative quiet in May is a probability, not a guarantee. The atmosphere in an ENSO transition year does not follow the analog playbook reliably. The SPC indicates another severe weather week ahead, with the probability for a moderate risk for Saturday and Sunday already flagged in the extended outlooks. The pattern remains active across the center of the nation, with several rounds of severe thunderstorms in the forecast through the weekend. Another severe weather week. Not possible severe weather. Another severe weather week. The storm train is running. It has been running since the first week of March. And despite everything that has happened, the EF4 in Enid, the 80 tornado outbreak on April 17th, the death in Runaway Bay, the outbreak in St. Louis and Missouri, it is not done. Here's where we stand Tuesday, April 28th, 2026. Monday's outbreak is verified. St. Louis was hit. Arkansas was hit. Tennessee was hit. The 1% probability signal that I told you about a week ago delivered exactly what it promised. And the communities that were prepared, places like Belton, Missouri, where the police chief specifically credited preparation for minimizing casualties, survived with remarkably few injuries given the scale of what hit them. The trailing storm system behind Monday's event is already becoming a powerful storm, leading to a multi-day severe weather outbreak across the plains, Midwest, and Mid-South through the end of this week and into the weekend. Tuesday brings flooding to the Arklatex and Tennessee Valley, Wednesday and Thursday bring the stalling front and fresh severe weather development to the deep south. Friday brings the end-of-week system that both major ensemble models are flagging. And the weekend brings whatever reloads behind that. The storm train is running, and the only question that matters right now, for the tens of millions of people in its path over the next 7 days, is whether they are ready for it. Know your flood risk. Turn around if you see water on a road. Keep your weather alerts on every single day this week, not just on the big outbreak days. Check in on your neighbors, your elderly relatives, your friends in the path of the flooding. And for anyone in the South, the Tennessee Valley, or the Deep South, understand that your threat this week is not primarily from tornadoes. It is from water. Rising, persistent, relentless water that doesn't announce itself on a radar the way a tornado does. The storm train does not stop because we're tired. It does not stop because communities have already been hit. It runs until the pattern breaks. And based on everything the WPC and the SPC are telling us right now, the pattern is not broken yet. Stay connected this week. Every day brings new data. Every update brings a sharper picture of where each car on this train is going to land. I'll be back with updates. Stay safe, and I genuinely mean that for everyone in the path of this pattern.